Sagittarius. The masks have fallen, and what they were hiding is worse than you imagined. The light has seen everything. You have always been a seeker of truth, but what happens when truth finds you first? Lately, have you felt a shift in the air? Something unsettling but not quite frightening? As if the world around you is cracking open, layer by layer, and everything that once looked whole now reveals a fracture. It's not paranoia. It's not imagination. It's revelation. This isn't about betrayal alone. This is about a deeper knowing. A sacred fire inside you that has always burned for what's real. You've walked through rooms lit with lies and still held your light. You've smiled at faces you knew weren't sincere and stayed silent. Not because you didn't know, but because you were waiting. And now, Sagittarius, that wait is over. The masks have fallen. And what they were hiding is far more than you once feared, but also far less than the light you now carry. If you've ever doubted your intuition, second-guessed your clarity, or held your tongue just to keep the peace, this message is your mirror. A reminder that your soul has always known what others tried to bury. So light a candle, take a breath, and if this speaks to something ancient in you, something that has waited too long to be named, then like, share, or subscribe. Not for applause but to say, I see now, and I choose to no longer look away. Gate 1. You were right all along, Sagittarius. It began as a whisper, a fleeting discomfort, a glance that lingered too long, or a silence that spoke too loudly. You entered rooms where the energy shifted the moment you walked in. You felt eyes on you, not in admiration but in hesitation. You couldn't quite explain it, but your soul knew. And that knowing never left you. Sagittarius, this is not about suspicion. It's about sacred awareness. There were people who praised you publicly while secretly fearing what you carried. Your truth, your discernment, your freedom. You walk with fire in your spirit and arrows of vision that pierce illusions. And in a world wrapped in masks, that kind of clarity is dangerous. You were told you were overreacting. You were urged to calm down, be nicer, be quieter. But no one could quiet the knowing in your chest. You smiled, but your body trembled. You reasoned, but your soul recoiled. And while others moved on in comfortable ignorance, you sat with the unbearable weight of seeing what was never meant to be seen. You weren't paranoid. You were chosen. Not everyone is given the gift of seeing through the veil, but you were. In spiritual traditions, this is known as divine sight, an intuitive alignment that allows you to sense the truth beneath any disguise. Some call it the gift of prophecy. Others call it the wound of the seer, because to know what others deny is both power and pain. You notice the patterns, the same lies repeating in different voices, the betrayals cloaked as kindness, the smiles that cracked at the edges when you turned your back. And still, you doubted yourself. You wanted to believe in goodness, in redemption, in harmony. But the truth kept surfacing like light underwater, quiet, persistent, undeniable. You were never meant to play along. You were meant to awaken. And now, as the masks fall one by one, what once isolated you is becoming your liberation. The universe is revealing what was always hidden, not to harm you, but to honor you. You were the first to tremble because your soul was the first to feel. You were the first to retreat because your intuition warned you before your logic could explain. And what they feared most wasn't your accusation. It was your clarity. They didn't hide because they were strong. They hid because they knew someone like you would see right through. You who have no tolerance for manipulation. You whose vision is not bound by what is visible. You who carries the fire of justice in your chest and the arrows of truth in your hands. The ones who deceived you didn't simply want to fool you. They wanted to diminish your light, to make you question yourself. But they failed. Because now your soul is rising, not in anger but in recognition. This isn't a war. It's a cleansing. You no longer need to ask for proof. The truth is rising on its own. Not with shouts or confrontations but with silence, the kind of silence that makes falsehood tremble. You don't need them to admit what they did. The universe already witnessed it. God already recorded it. And the balance has already begun to restore. So what do you do now? You breathe. You forgive, not because they deserve it but because you deserve peace. You let the fire inside you keep burning. But this time, not to destroy, to illuminate. Because you, Sagittarius, were never just the one who saw the truth. You were always the one sent to guide others through it. And if today you feel something shift, a release in your chest, a clarity in your breath, a warmth returning to the parts of you that were once numb. Know this. It's not because you finally understand them. It's because you finally understand yourself. Gate 2. The judgment has already begun, Sagittarius. There was a time you stayed quiet. Not because you didn't know, but because you didn't want to hurt anyone. You bit your tongue when the lies felt too loud. You gave people the benefit of the doubt when your soul had already whispered, "This is not safe." You forgave when you should have walked away. You stayed when your spirit had already left. Sagittarius, you've always been generous, with your time, with your love, with your second chances. But generosity, when given to the unworthy, becomes exhaustion. And that's what they left you with. A hollowed-out heart full of questions you were never meant to carry. But listen closely now, because something has shifted. The universe has risen to your defense. Not with rage, not with noise, but with sacred precision. Judgment has begun, not by your hand, but by the hand of the divine. You don't need to send a message, post a thing, or prove your side of the story. Because the truth is already speaking through silence, through consequences, through shifts you can't even see yet, but your spirit knows are already in motion. They thought they could erase you with energy. They thought they could win by staying silent while you broke in secret. But every tear you ever swallowed has become water to cleanse the path ahead. Every time you held yourself at night, asking what you did wrong, those nights were recorded in a realm where nothing is ever forgotten. You didn't lose because you were weak. You were shielded because you were sacred. You may never receive their apology. That job might never call back. That friend may never say, "You were right." But you won't need it anymore because the scales have already tipped. You are no longer living under their illusion. And the divine has no need for drama to deliver justice. Sometimes it arrives as a sudden stillness, a door that finally closes, a new opportunity that blooms without noise, a burden lifted before you even know why. And Sagittarius, the energy is returning. That heaviness in your chest is loosening. The weight of pretending is lifting. The ache of being unseen is fading, not because they finally saw you, but because you finally chose to stop shrinking for people who couldn't meet your light. In Buddhist wisdom it is said, "The evil one harms himself, like rust devouring the iron it was formed from." And in sacred scripture, "The truth shall set you free." These are not metaphors. They are laws of the unseen realm. You see, the ones who harmed you did so not because of what you lacked, but because of what you had. They couldn't bear your fire, so they tried to dim it. But now that fire is no longer hidden. And as it rises, they will have to sit with what they tried to destroy. But you, dear Sagittarius, you will rise differently. Not with bitterness, but with blessing. Forgive, not to excuse them, but to reclaim your peace. Release, not to forget, but to stop bleeding where they pierced you. Let go, not to move on, but to move through into the next version of you. Because the story is shifting, and not in their favor. If they once smiled in your face while silently wishing for your failure, they will now watch you bloom in soil they thought they'd poisoned. And that bloom will be the loudest truth of all. So, no, you don't have to be nice anymore to make them comfortable. You don't have to keep the peace if it costs you your inner clarity. You don't have to explain why you're no longer available to pretend. Your silence now speaks volumes. Your peace is the thunder they'll never forget. And if you've ever felt like someone hugged you with one arm while hiding a dagger behind their back, remember this: God saw it, the universe recorded it, and justice never forgets. The miracle is already returning, not to validate your wounds, but to remind you that you were never forsaken. Gate 3. Nothing leaves without a sacred reason, Sagittarius. There was a moment, wasn't there? A quiet hour when you sat alone and felt something leave. Not with a goodbye, but with a shift in the air. It could have been a love, a friendship, an opportunity, maybe even a version of yourself. And it hurt. Deeply. Not just because it left, but because it left you wondering, was I not enough? Sagittarius, your fire burns so brightly that it's easy to forget how deeply you feel. But beneath your courage and wild spirit is a heart that holds on longer than it should. You don't fall often, but when you do, you give it your all. And when that all gets left behind, the silence echoes louder than any storm. But let this be a sacred reminder. Nothing that was meant for you will ever leave without a purpose. You see, what left did not abandon you. It was removed by a love greater than yours. Removed not to punish, but to protect. Because sometimes what you desire isn't yet aligned with what your soul deserves. And you, Sagittarius, deserve something lasting, something sacred, something that doesn't shrink in the presence of your truth. There were things you begged to stay, people you prayed for, places you called home even as they turned cold. You asked the universe for signs, for one more chance, for clarity, but all you received was silence. And in that silence you wondered, had I done something differently, would it have stayed? But that's the wound speaking. The truth is, no door truly closes unless a greater one is already being carved open. One that matches your growth, your healing, your deeper becoming. And often, it takes the removal of the familiar to awaken you to the extraordinary. In sacred teachings it is written, no one can take from you what God has ordained for you. Let that truth echo through the parts of you that still long for what has passed. Because while you were mourning the loss, the divine was already preparing the return. Not in the same form, not in the shape of the old, but in the frequency of who you're becoming now. Sagittarius, your worth was never dependent on what stayed. You are not someone who must fight to be chosen. You are not here to chase love, opportunities, or recognition. You are here to receive, with hands open and spirit free. And so if a door slammed shut, if someone walked away, if something you loved dissolved into memory, let it go, not in bitterness but in blessing. Because the timing wasn't wrong. It was sacred. You see, the universe has been teaching you how to trust. Not in people, not in plans, but in your own light. And now something new is forming. You'll know it not because it arrives with noise, but because your soul will go still. You'll feel it in the breath you didn't know you were holding finally released. You'll see it in the dream that returns, not as fantasy, but as reality that now fits who you've become. You don't have to prove yourself worthy anymore. You don't have to shrink to fit into spaces that were too small for your light. You don't have to apologize for wanting more, for craving authenticity, depth, soul. What left did so because it could not rise with you. But what comes next will match you in every way. So place your hand on your chest, Sagittarius. Close your eyes. Whisper this softly. I bless what left. I trust what's coming. I am worthy of receiving without fear. And from this moment forward, let that be your quiet anthem. Because you're not just stepping into a new chapter. You're stepping into the life you were always meant to live. The one your past couldn't enter, because it was waiting for you to arrive whole. Gate 4. The return isn't rescue. It's alignment, Sagittarius. There comes a moment, not loud but sacred, when you stop waiting. Not out of bitterness but from inner knowing. Not because you've given up, but because something within has finally made peace with what left. And it is in that moment, Sagittarius, when the winds begin to shift. You once loved someone or something so deeply, so completely, that you felt as though your soul was stitched to theirs. You prayed not for them to return, but for the ache to release. You whispered into your pillow at night, why does my spirit still recognize theirs, when the world has already moved on? And then slowly silence took root. A silence that didn't feel empty but sacred. It was no longer the silence of grief but of presence. You no longer needed them to come back because you had already returned to yourself. And it is in that quiet right there that something awakens, not from your longing but from theirs. Sagittarius, the one who left is beginning to remember. Not your name but your light. They are not returning with promises or persuasion. They are returning with presence, with humility, with the trembling heart of someone who has been changed by your absence. Because when you stopped chasing, the energy reversed. And the mirror you held up, the one that once scared them, is now the very reflection they long to face. This is not a rescue. This is a realignment. In Buddhist teachings there is a truth. When two souls are tied by unfinished karma, the thread will pull again, not to repeat pain, but to invite evolution. And in sacred scripture, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You, Sagittarius, endured without bitterness. You believed even when no one validated your faith. You loved even when it made you bleed. And that love, that silent, strong, uncompromised love, is what made the return possible. But this time something is different. You're no longer the one who is hoping. You're the one who has become. You have become the guardian of your peace. You have become the keeper of your boundaries. You have become the flame that cannot be dimmed by anyone's delay. So if someone returns now, They are not coming back to the version of you they once took for granted. They are meeting a soul who has been purified by fire, who has grown roots in solitude, who no longer needs love to fill a wound, but is ready to share it from overflow. Sagittarius, if they come back now, it is not to save you. It is to walk with you fully, presently, reverently. And you do not forgive because you're weak. You forgive because you've seen what clinging does to the soul. Now when love comes, it will not knock loudly. It will stand at your door and wait, with the patience you once begged for. So if you find yourself thinking of them again, not in longing but in calm recognition, trust it. If their name appears in dreams, not to haunt but to soften, welcome it. And if they do return, and their voice trembles as they speak the truth you always sensed, listen not with old pain but with new clarity. And if they do not return, then let that be the final gift. Because the lesson wasn't about them, it was about your becoming. Sagittarius, love isn't something you chase. It's something that meets you when you no longer need to be found. And now you know you are no longer waiting. You are ready. Conclusion. The journey was never about loss, Sagittarius. It was about light. So here you are, Sagittarius. Not broken, not lost, but finally beginning to understand why it all unfolded the way it did. You weren't wrong to love that deeply. You weren't foolish to trust your intuition. You weren't too much, you were simply ahead of time. You felt the shift before anyone else. You sensed the cracks behind the smiles. You mourned the loss long before it was acknowledged. Because your soul was never meant to play by this world's rules. You were born to see through illusion, to rise after being torn down, to reclaim your light, not through someone else's apology, but through your own return. And you did. You returned to your wisdom, to your worth, to the sacred fire that lives within you. Not the flame that burns others, but the one that illuminates everything you touch. Now you no longer chase what isn't yours. You no longer shrink for those who fear your depth. You no longer beg to be seen because you see yourself. The masks have fallen, and what they were hiding is no longer your concern. Because your truth has already made its way to the surface. And the universe, quietly, patiently, has been waiting for you to trust it again. So if something begins to bloom from the ashes, let it. If someone returns, not to rescue you but to walk beside you, receive it. And if nothing returns except your own sense of peace, let that be enough. Because Sagittarius, the miracle isn't what comes next. The miracle is who you are now. If this journey has stirred something in your heart, if you've recognized your own reflection in these words, know this: you are never alone. You are part of something far greater, a constellation of souls walking home to themselves. And if your light feels just a little brighter tonight, don't forget to share it. Leave a comment. Share this with a fellow seeker. Subscribe to continue walking this path with us. Because here in this sacred space, your story matters. And it's only just beginning.